Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. You're watching Alaska weather with us on this 8th of October. Thanks for joining us tonight. As always, you can stay up to date with your local weather information by calling us on the Alaska Weather Information Line. 1-800-472-0391 will do the trick. You can find us online as well, weather.gov/Alaska. If you click on the bottom of your screen for the TV maps, you'll get a lot of the images that you see here on the show all the way through tomorrow morning. And if you still can't find what you're looking for, let me know. David.Snider@NOAA.gov is an easy way to find me. As far as hazardous weather goes, winter storm warnings are painted in red tonight across the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range, and yellow areas are winter weather advisories. Both are winter weather alerts of some type. The warnings are a little bit worse, expecting some heavier snowfall. And the yellow shaded areas simply mean that snow is going to occur. It'll probably be on at least the annoyance level or inconvenience level, but perhaps not as dangerous as a winter storm warning where heavier snow is expected. So let's get to it. In the upper Kobuk and Noatak valleys and the lower end of the valleys, we're expecting anywhere from 2 inches of snow in the lower parts of the valley to as much as 8 inches there in the upper parts of the valley at around Ambler. And there could be some cases where you see as much as 13 to 15 inches of new snow. A lot of that will likely be north of the Kiana to Ambler line there and up into the hills. As you look out into the Yukon Flats, also looking for about 4 to 8 inches of snow. This could last until 6 p.m. on Wednesday. For the yellow shaded areas, including Bettles all the way down to Tanana in the central interior, the middle Tanana Valley, Denali, and the eastern Alaska Range, a wide range of snowfall is possible. So that just because it's one color doesn't mean it's going to be exactly the same level of snow. In fact, for different areas, different amounts of snow are more inconvenient or more dangerous, so we adjust that for you. But for the eastern Alaska Range, it looks like about 1 to 5 inches of snow, as much as 9 by 6 o'clock on Wednesday. For the central interior and down into Denali, we expect to see anywhere from 2 to 5 inches of snow, maybe as much as a foot in some of the higher terrain. Around the middle Tanana Valley, expecting about 4 to 7 inches of snow. Some places could see as much as 10. And again, for areas around Bettles and the upper Koyukuk, 2 to 5 inches of snow, as much as 11 inches possible in a few spots. Now, for places like the Elliott Highway summits there, 2 to 4 inches of snow certainly possible in some of the passes. Be extra careful as you're driving around some of the highways there, especially the higher spots. We'll be looking at additional snowfall amounts on top of what you normally see. As we look at the satellite picture, you can see the broad area of low pressure here working across the Bering Strait in a deep southwesterly flow, bringing up moisture into southwestern and south central Alaska. A lot of that is slowly gathering into southern parts of the Yukon, the eastern interior, and certainly working with the colder air in place across the interior to bring down some decent amounts of snow. Low pressure will continue to sit and spin across the northern Bering Sea and into the Chukchi, and slowly break off as it moves into the central and western interior as we go over the next 24 to 36 hours. And with that, we should expect to see waves of precipitation working over south central and southwest, and eventually a new area of low pressure is going to develop here in the northern Gulf. This should be watched, especially if you're in southeast, and especially if you're in places like Yakutat, Prince William Sound, and maybe even northern Panhandle, as this will be able to crank up the winds and certainly produce a decent amount of precipitation, especially on top of recent rainfall and recent wind across southeast. This should be monitored for some wind development across marine areas, and certainly as a major precipitation maker, mainly in the form of rain at this point. But as we go into the mountains here and into the early season of winter, it certainly does look like it could be capable of producing some mountain snow as well. Today's forecast shows low pressure sitting here just west of the Bering Strait at about 999 millibars. You can see colder air is pushing southward already. The main front is working ashore through Norton Sound, through parts of southwestern Alaska, areas of light rain ahead of that, and decent amounts of snow out in front of it as that's working through that colder air. High pressure sitting over the Gulf now, a strong area of 1,033 millibars, trying to chip away at the clouds across southeast. Not a bad day today, not a bad night tonight. There might be a couple pockets of rain there, but nothing too substantial. The meat and potatoes is still back to the west. As that's working over Kodiak, you'll see a wind shift a little bit more from the south and west, becoming more west and northwesterly as we go through early tomorrow morning. Out ahead of this, again, rain and snow for the interior, and once again, winter weather advisories and winter storm warnings are posted. The area of low pressure kind of loses a lot of its characteristics as we get into Wednesday, so the main focus is really going to quickly shift into northern parts of the Gulf as we get into tonight. Low pressure south of Kodiak at 1,014 millibars isn't a whole lot to write home about on Wednesday, but by Thursday that's going to start to change very quickly. High pressure south and west of Haida Gwaii at 1,033 millibars, still bringing in light southerlies, and there may be some areas of light rain with that, but really this is still not the main feature. It looks like we'll start to have the opportunity for some heavier rainfall around Prince William Sound, perhaps as early as Wednesday afternoon. Snow should continue through the daytime across the interior and especially the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range as we get into Wednesday night. A lot of the winter weather advisories and warnings are telling us that the worst of the weather will likely start to improve as we get into about 6 p.m. or so. So after that, conditions are expected to improve. Out across the west, a much deeper area of low pressure is developing on the other side of high pressure. You can see that stretching all the way from the Gulf of Anadyr through the central chain, and there's going to be another wave behind that again as a super typhoon starts to recurve and gets closer to Alaska as we get into the weekend. In the meantime, for Thursday, you can see how this broad area of low pressure is slowing down, starting to organize a little bit more, and look at the pressure gradients shaping up here across the eastern Gulf. A very deep southerly flow sets up and moderate to likely heavy rain developing across the northern Gulf Coast. Not that this is an unusual place to have that, but because this is going to organize quickly, I wanted to make sure I pointed it out. Northern sections of southeast all the way into Prince William Sound will have the opportunity for heavier precipitation. And I think the wind's going to be an issue too. That really strong barrier jet that forms in this type of situation will be something to watch, especially if you're heading across the Gulf there in a kind of a late season crossing. Out to the west, a 998 millibar low here. Showers back behind it. Out ahead of it, a gathering southwesterly flow pushing its way into the Pribilofs and the central chain by Thursday afternoon. By the time this gets into southwestern Alaska, this will be a stronger storm as well. And watch for pockets of snow and rain across the interior, primarily snow north of the Alaska Range. Temperature-wise, we're looking at readings at or above freezing for southeast in the morning tomorrow. Probably mid to upper 30s, lower 40s for the Cook Inlet region, Prince William Sound. Southwest above freezing for now. Coastal areas a little bit closer to the 40-degree mark. The Alaska Peninsula likely in the mid 40s. Sand Point, for example, 45. Fairbanks about 34 degrees. Fort Yukon all the way up toward Anaktuvuk Pass and Arctic Village cooling off quick, anywhere from the teens and 20s down into the 30s as you get into the lower lands. 20s and 30s for the North Slope, about 36 degrees for Kivalina. High temperatures on Wednesday, closing in on 40 degrees there. So mid-30s for the North Slope, 40 for Fort Yukon, about 40 degrees or so for Fairbanks. A wet snow, and right there on the line tonight and tomorrow. South Central, upper 40s to about 50 degrees and mild, 40s and 50s for Southeast, Southwest, closer to 50 degrees. Overnight low temperatures cooler again in the higher train of the Brooks Range, 20s and 30s for South Central and Southwest, a little bit milder. Southeast, 44 around Sitka. High temperatures on Thursday afternoon. Back close to freezing for Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse, 33 in Kaktovik, 36 for Utqiagvik. Kotzebue Sound temps in the mid to upper 30s, maybe 40 degrees around Shish. Bristol Bay temperatures in the mid 40s. Kodiak near 50, southeast, upper 40s and lower 50s.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
And back with your aviation weather now. IFR concerns will continue across the Chukchi Coast into the upper Kobuk and Noatak valleys, the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range through the Koyukuk and the upper Kuskokwim and the middle Yukon valleys. Watch for IFR developing around Chillicothe Strait and Kodiak Island, the Wrangell-St. Elias region, as well as western parts of Prince William Sound. Everywhere else primarily dealing with marginal conditions to start. Some exceptions would be the Beaufort Seacoast, the upper Tanana, and really most of southeast looking pretty good by early Wednesday morning. As we get into the afternoon, though, MVFR quickly fills in there. The Chilkoot and White Pass regions north of Juneau looking at IFR developing. Prince William Sound into the northern Gulf, and then east of Kodiak Island, expecting to see IFR strengthening there. Same goes for the Susitna Valley into Anchorage and probably the northern parts of Cook Inlet. Most of the Yukon Valley looking at IFR, and a large part of the Brooks Range will see IFR stretching into the Beaufort Seacoast over places like Prudhoe Bay, Dead Horse, and just north of Kaktovik. Out to the west, a little bit of a break for our friends in St. Paul and St. George. Out west further to Shimya and Kiska, looking for IFR to push in there. And you can see that quickly fills in again by Thursday morning with some breaks in the MVFR around St. Paul and St. George. Looking for MVFR to come back in towards Sitkinak and Chillicothe Strait. IFR conditions back in for Chilkoot and White Pass in the northern Gulf into Prince William Sound. And then really the majority of the Yukon Valley looking at IFR. That will cover up Fairbanks as well. Brooks Range, including Adigan and AKwx Pass looking at IFR for Thursday morning, which should let up just a little bit. You'll still have marginal concerns throughout your afternoon Thursday. IFR expected across the northern Gulf Coast with southeast still holding on to marginal conditions. Looking for IFR around the Alaska Range, south and west into the coastline, and most of the Bering still looking at marginal conditions, with a band of IFR setting up along a frontal boundary pushing through the central Bering Sea by Thursday afternoon. Here's your pass conditions in detail then. AKwx and Adigan Pass are expecting to start at marginal conditions, pushing over toward IFR as the day goes on Wednesday. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, we expect to see instrument flight rule really all day long, and same should be said for Rainy Pass as you get into your Wednesday afternoon. Windy Pass expecting no change. IFR concerns continue there, but some improvement is expected around Isabel Pass in the afternoon, maybe to marginal levels. Mentasta Pass, we expect to see marginal conditions develop and hold really most of the day. Tanita Pass looking for marginal levels, pushing over toward IFR as we go. And Portage Pass, instrument flight rule expected throughout your Wednesday. Chilcotin White Pass, we'll see changing conditions all day long with VFR in the morning and IFR by the afternoon. Freezing levels then indicate that trough of low pressure out across the west. That's building the warmth across the Gulf Coast, allowing some of that to creep into southeast, pushing levels up to 2,000 feet around Kotzebue Sound and Norton Sound. The surface freezing line, though, is undercutting that across the north and the east. And you can see it's also dropping southward behind the trough out across the western Bering Sea. Levels there as low as 2,000 to 4,000 feet north of the chain and as high as 6 to 8 just to the south and over the Gulf. As you look at icing potential, we've got a lot of different levels here today, and that's simply due to the change in conditions across the west where we have a trough of low pressure in the west and a ridge of high pressure in the east, allowing that warmth to build in. So the moisture is there. Levels are coming down to about 6,000 to 8,000 feet across southeast, south central, and the eastern interior. But out to the west, a little bit closer to that trough, you can see levels as cold as 2,000 feet, coastal areas closer to 5, and the interior, including the middle Yukon Valley, around 4,000 foot level and above. All of this, again, generally isolated moderate. Here's a look at the jet stream. The fast-moving river of air is controlling our weather at the surface, and out over the Bering, you can see levels there from about 100 to 150 knots coming in from north to south, but then we run into that ridge of high pressure in the east, and levels quickly climb up to about 100 knots or so, and then descend again to about 90 knots across the west coast of North America. We also have another extension of that trough into the North Pacific. Each one of these waves is capable of dragging in colder air every time it passes, but they are slow movers, and it looks like we'll be working with this one through the next several days. Low pressure across Kotzebue Sound at 9,000 feet has a broad southwesterly flow out ahead of it, as is normal, anywhere from 25 to 35 knots across the central and eastern interior, high pressure across the Pacific Northwest, and another ridge that's built in across the western Bering. Behind that, another trough, 40 to 60 knots on the west side of that. At 3,000 feet, low pressure systems a little bit further south in this case, and that gives us a little bit more of a southwesterly flow, stronger over across southwest Alaska. Southwesterlies up to 20 across the Beaufort Seacoast. High pressure sitting across the eastern Gulf, 20 to 30 knots coming into southeast. Light winds generally around south central, and high pressure sitting out across the central chain. Turbulence then, the main concerns will be around Kodiak Island and Shelikof Strait, the Alaska Range, and out across the eastern Tanana Valley. Southeast looks pretty good. Bering Strait, a little bit of chop around St. Lawrence Island. Considerable moderate there tomorrow, generally below 4,000 feet.
Dual polarization technology is a major upgrade to the current radar system. It allows forecasters a better idea of what's actually out there and can help keep you safe.
Current radar technology transmits and receives information in the horizontal direction, which is very limited. Dual polarization technology, in addition to the horizontal, transmits and receives vertical energy, which allows forecasters to get information about the size, shape, and phase of the precipitation. We can use that information to better determine the precipitation type to expect at your given location.
There you have it. This new technology is currently being installed in radars across the country and is already being used by National Weather Service forecasters to produce better, more accurate forecasts. Learn more here and follow us. Want to know about the future of weather radar? Well, the National Severe Storms Lab has it here with its new phased array radar. Let's check it out.
It's a non-moving radar. It has 4 faces of the antenna, each pointing in different directions. One of the big advantages is that we're seeing so far, it can sample the area around the radar in less than a minute, maybe even a half a minute. And this is 5-6 times faster than what they can do today.
NSSL is leading the development of future weather radar with this project. Learn more here and follow us. The Storm Prediction Center is one of the NOAA weather partners. They are located in the National Weather Center in Norman, Oklahoma. Greg Carbon gives us a glimpse into what the SPC does.
Our mission is to analyze and forecast severe thunderstorms and the potential for tornadoes, large hail, and damaging winds from those thunderstorms across the lower 48 states, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. One of the primary missions of the Storm Prediction Center is the issuance of severe thunderstorm and tornado watches across the country when conditions appear to be coming together to support the development of severe thunderstorms and tornadoes.
The world-class meteorologists in the Storm Prediction Center specialize in severe weather and keeping you safe. Learn more here and follow us.
The National Severe Storms Lab is working on increasing the lead time for severe weather warnings. The national average for tornado warnings is currently 13 minutes, but more notice would be helpful, especially for those in charge of moving large groups to shelter. Warn on Forecast will help forecasters issue hazardous weather warnings earlier. The project will give them more info about the chances of strong winds, large hail, and even tornadoes.
Currently, warnings are created by forecasters looking at the atmosphere outside, understanding its volatility, and then comparing that to how they see the Doppler radar presenting what's going on inside the thunderstorms. Warn on Forecast is an idea where we're going to take the massive amounts of satellite, radar, and surface data and stick them all into a very high resolution prediction model. And then by producing new forecasts every 15 or 20 minutes, the forecasters hopefully will be able to use that model to produce warnings that extend out to an hour.
Before the National Weather Service can use this tool, it must be developed and tested. One big challenge will be deciding how to get the model predictions to the forecasters.
I'm going to keep this one very low. I'm just adjusting the track.
These hazardous weather prediction models are going to produce a huge amount of output. And this fire hose of data is just too much for forecasters to handle in real time quickly. So in order to help deal with that, NSSL has developed a related project called Facets. And Facets is the methodology which will enable forecasters to focus very quickly on the most important threats.
Once Warn on Forecast and Facets are proven to be reliable and effective, then forecasters will be better able to inform you of threats nearby. Learn more here and follow us.
The Hazardous Weather Test Bed is located at the National Weather Center in Norman, Oklahoma. It is used for experiments that will allow forecasters to learn and apply new technologies.
The Hazardous Weather Test Bed is a really unique space throughout all of NOAA. And this is where the researchers and the operational folks come together in a common space to solve operational problems and to test new research tools that the research community is working on. The goal is to accelerate the transfer from research to operations of the newest tools and techniques.
People come from around the world to collaborate on this unique project.
We can bring together not only NOAA people, but also university people, faculty, researchers, private sector meteorologists, folks working in other countries in meteorology, forecasters can all come together and focus on what the problem of the day is with the forecasters.
Each spring, several experiments occur in the hazardous weather test bed. Learn more here and follow us.
What are you looking at? And what are you ignoring? Did you notice the NOAA logo in the corner? Forecasters have a lot of information in front of them too. Every second counts during severe weather, and decisions about where to focus are constantly being made. This could be even more challenging in the future. Phased array radar will produce 4 to 6 times more information than what we have now, which brings us to the question researchers are hoping to answer. Will more radar information affect forecasters' decisions?
From our past experiments, we've learned a lot about how forecasters think during the warning decision process, but we've also learned that those thought processes are very complex, and for that reason, we need a better way to be able to track forecasters' cognitive activity.
Inbounds and possibly golf ball sized hail.
An eye tracker is a piece of technology that is used to determine in real time where someone's eye gaze is located. And these eye trackers are typically video-based, which means a camera sits below a computer monitor, and with infrared light and vector analysis, we can determine where a person is looking and how their eyes are moving.
Eye tracking is already being used in the medical field and air traffic control. Using similar research methods, NSSL is discovering the benefit for weather forecasting too. Phased array radar will give forecasters a lot more to think about. Understanding their decision-making process will help researchers develop even more user-friendly tools. So what's the benefit for you? Even better weather warnings. To learn more, check us out online and follow us on Facebook and Twitter.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
And back with your marine weather now, and we're still working with our sea ice image, but you get the drift here. There is drifting new ice coming in across our area that we're watching north of Kaktovik and Demarcation Point. There's also ice growing along that boundary, so good news there as we work into winter quickly. There is some more wintry type of layers out there in the ocean. It looks like at least marginal ice along that old ice boundary, which is what you see in red there in the higher concentration ice, and ice also advecting in and growing along that boundary, but still several hundred miles north of Kaktovik and even further away from Utqiagvik at this point. As far as the marine forecast goes in southeast, winds are going to pick up a little bit more from the south as we go into the next couple days. For the inside passage, 10 to 15 knots, looking at 2 to 3 foot seas there. An onshore flow from Yakutat all the way down to the Dixon entrance, also looking at about 10 to 15 knots with 4 to 5 foot seas in the area Wednesday. Winds really come up sharply across the outer coast on Thursday, up to 30 to 35 knots, 11 to 13 foot seas in most areas. On the inside passage, 4 to 5 foot seas there, but look at the gusts from Sivas Passage all the way up to the Lynn Canal. Those coming up to about 40 knots on a 20 to 25 knot sustained wind on Thursday afternoon in southeast. For Prince William Sound, 15 to 20 knots there on either side of Hitchinbrook entrance. So you're looking at about 3 to 6 foot seas in the region. For the Barren Islands all the way out into Cook Inlet, 20 to 25, 6 foot seas in the area. Probably have some higher seas north of Kashamak Bay up toward Kenai, a southerly flow at 25 knots on Wednesday. That reverses course and really diminishes on Thursday afternoon. West and northwesterlies coming across the Barrens, 30 knots there, 9 to 10 foot seas. Easterlies developing inside of Prince William Sound. And like I was saying earlier, we're going to watch this area here across the northern Gulf into southeast as we get into Thursday night and Friday. I really think we're going to start to see some higher winds developing here as well as some heavier rain. 12 foot seas, though, by Thursday afternoon. For Wednesday in Bristol Bay, westerlies coming across. Those are picking up there from the Pribilofs all the way out toward the Bering Sea coast of the Alaska Peninsula. 4 to 9 foot seas developing with a 15 to 20 knot wind. 20 knotters across Kodiak Island and all the way down to Sand Point and False Pass. You're looking at about 6 to 7 foot seas in the region. By Thursday, the heavier winds and seas shift eastward just a little bit more into the Gulf. Still looking at 20 knot winds in the area, 25 across the Pacific Coast waters. 6 to 7 foot seas there on Thursday, and 6 to 8 foot seas from Bristol Bay all the way down toward Cold Bay on the Bering Sea coast Thursday. For Wednesday across the chain, 15 to 20 knots or so, mainly a northwesterly flow coming through. 10 knot winds from Adak all the way out toward Unalaska. The Pacific coastal waters, 5 to 7 foot seas, 15 to 20 there. And look at the southerly winds developing in the west. 20 to 40 knot winds, 7 to 11 foot seas building on Wednesday. As we get into Thursday, look for that southwesterly shift, all flowing into low pressure across the western Bering as that is strengthening. A high pressure ridge is moving eastward. Winds will diminish across the central and eastern chain on Thursday. Looking for about 15 to 30 knot winds, 5 to 12 foot seas on the Pacific coast waters, and 7 to 10 foot seas there from Unalaska all the way out toward Adak as you get into Thursday afternoon. For Wednesday in the west coast, looking at westerlies coming into Norton Sound, 4 foot seas there, and a west to northwesterly flow all the way from St. Matthew down toward St. Paul and St. George. 25 knots with 11 foot seas, 7 foot seas inside of the Kuskokwim Delta with a 20 knot wind. For Thursday, look for a light northwesterly shift to develop, really not a big change in the wind. But the wind should diminish just a little bit. Look for a southeasterly flow around St. Matthew, 30 knots with a 6 foot sea, and winds greatly diminish around St. Paul and St. George, 15 knots and 6 foot seas on Thursday. For the north slope, an onshore flow around Prudhoe Bay all the way out toward Utqiagvik, 10 to 15 knots, 3 foot seas there, a westerly flow around Kaktovik. Northerlies still blowing 25 to 30 knots with 6 to 9 foot seas from Cape Lisburne all the way down toward Kivalina and into Kotzebue Sound. For Thursday, winds diminish a little bit here. You're still looking at 15 to 20, and some of that is coming onshore, anywhere from 5 to 6 foot seas with stronger westerly flow developing across the Beaufort, 15 to 20 with 4 to 6 foot seas in the region as we move into Thursday afternoon. Recapping tonight's weather, winter storm warnings are in effect for the Kobuk and Noatak valleys there, and winter weather advisories are posted for many parts of the central and eastern interior. In general, it looks like there could be some areas on the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range and the Yukon Flats, for that matter, that could see anywhere from about 6 to 8 inches of snow. In some cases, maybe as much as a foot. 4 to 8 inches is a little more likely around Fort Yukon. For Fairbanks, for areas around Tanana and into the central interior, as well as Denali and the eastern Alaska Range, it's going to snow at least through tomorrow afternoon, probably diminish by the evening hours, but you'll likely wind up with some snowy roads in your area. Fairbanks will be flirting with the freezing point, so that means that that snow could be pretty wet and slushy, if not briefly switching back and forth to rain, so be careful out there. Out across the west, rain moves in and starts to strengthen, and the wind starts to pick up across the northern Gulf as we go into Thursday, and a new storm's on the way through the Bering, followed by another one into the weekend that could be significantly stronger. So pay attention to the weather. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.